Hi, welcome to Relish Books. So, this morning I was just having some thoughts about Ellen Montgomery, and I was kind of just thinking about her as a writer. And I think I was kind of comparing her to like Jane Austen, Charlotte Bronte, some of these other great female authors. Obviously, I think Austen and Bronte are much better, but I do think Ellen Montgomery has some really good work. But I was kind of thinking about some common problems that these great known as like romance authors have, and some problems that they seem to struggle with in common. Charlotte Bronte is the exception to this, and I'll talk about that a little bit later. But I just thought I would share some of these thoughts with you. And so yeah, Ellen Montgomery is best known, of course, for the Anne of Green Gables series, but she has a ton of work. She's a very prolific author. She published over or about 530 short stories. That was basically how she made her livelihood, especially early on, just publishing story after story to magazines just to get by. These were very, and you can't judge her off the quality of those because they're very cranked out. I don't think she was even that proud of them. They were really just for her subsistence. But her novels, unfortunately, have a lot of the same problems that you see in her short stories. These tendencies that she has that occur over and over and over again. Now, I love Anne of Green Gables, and I really enjoy a lot of her other work. She has some really great strengths, but she has some really big weaknesses. So I'm just going to talk about some of those. The biggest problem, and the problem that I was really thinking about as like compared to Jane Austen, and while I think that Austen kind of overcame this difficulty for the most part, I think it's really only her first book that really suffers from this. Ellen Montgomery had it her entire career. And it's this lack of development in the heroes, a lack of male development. The thing that's interesting about Ellen Montgomery is that she clearly loved romance. I feel like she was in love with the idea of romance. She wanted to write romance, but it was not her strong point. She is fine at writing male characters when they're just friends with people. She's fine at writing like comical male characters or like really good guys as long as they're not romantically involved with anybody. But as soon as things turn romantic, she gets super, super awkward and does not know what to do with them. And that's why it's like she really wanted to write romance, but in most of her like main series, the hero is essentially non-existent for most of the plot. She'll talk and talk and talk about the heroine's feelings for the hero, and maybe she'll talk about how he felt, but they his actual development, anytime that he like speaks, I'm talking kind of about the male characters in general in her books, are very, very limited, these instances of them having any kind of development. So Anne of Green Gables is her best known, and I think that's for good reason. The first book is excellent, and it doesn't really have these problems because it's more like Anne's childhood, and Gilbert is just like a romantic interest. Their relationship is much more interesting. He's always interested in her, but they're really young. They eventually, they have this love-hate relationship. They eventually become friends. He works fine while he's still just a friend. And it works fine while there's like romantic tension basically, because he's in love with her. He's wanting her to be with him, and she's one of those heroines, who kind of the classic example really. She's like, oh, I don't love you that way. I don't love you that way, till he almost dies, and then she realized, oh, I do love you that way. Which is another thing that Ella Montgomery seemed to kind of enjoy, these female characters who really resist the romance for years and years and years and years and years. You'd think that these women would just live forever, the way that 8 years can pass and doesn't really mean anything. But that's a side note. But So yeah, Gilbert works fine until he actually is accepted as her lover. Once they become engaged, he really disappears from the books. And anytime that he ever comes in again, it's super awkward, uncomfortable, and he's terribly written. And Anne's character really suffers too because um, while I appreciate that Ellen Montgomery tried to go the mile in that, most romances end as soon as everything's resolved, she did go on to write about like Anne's married life, and I think that's something that's rare, and I think that's neat if she could have done it well, but she did not. You really, I feel like if you read those later books, and again, I wouldn't recommend reading them except that I really like Rilla. Although honestly, you could just skip to it. I don't know. There's some good stuff in like Anne of Ingleside and Rainbow Valley, but I feel like those ones are really not essential at all. But anyway, she loses her ability to write about the characters once they're established. And I think it's really in this lack of development of the characters, a lack of comfort in writing about these things. It's like she really wanted to, but she just wasn't good at it. And a lack of chemistry, too, between the characters. She didn't know how to write characters that she knew well enough to have them play off of each other. It just didn't work very well. And so, like, in the Anne books, you see that. And then in Rilla's story works pretty well because, again, her hero is pretty much non-existent, and it works for him to be non-existent because you kind of have this understanding that she has known him all growing up. She knows him very well, so it's not unbelievable to you that she would be in love with him. But, it's a war story. He's gone pretty much the entire book. So their relationship, like growing and developing, isn't what it's about at all. There's just this man that she loves, and you kind of just accept that in the story. So it works because, again, he has absolutely no development whatsoever. But you can forgive that because he's not really supposed to. This is an even greater flaw in her other books. Like the Anne books as a whole, like as a series, are her best series. And there's also the most of them. She had one of those issues, I feel like writers unfortunately so often do. She did not want to keep writing Anne books, and I think that's partly why they suffer. Anne was not one of her favorite characters that she wrote, and it was really fans' pressure that made her keep writing the books. Her publishers really pressured her to, if my understanding's correct. So yeah, that might be partly why the books really get rough. And, well, it's really just those two. I hate the way that like Anne and Gilbert are talked about in their later married life. It really drives me crazy. Because like Anne of the Island, I really like Anne of Green Gables, Anne of Avonlea. Anne of the Island has some issues, but like it actually has some of the funnest stuff in the books, in my opinion. The Anne's time at college when she's staying in the house with like her 4 roommates, I think that whole period is super fun. I really enjoy that. And then you have Anne of Windy Poplars, which is different. It's written like in letter form, and it's pretty funny, and it is fun. It kind of depends on just like what style you like, whether you like that one. I know some people who it's like one of their favorites. It's not personally a favorite of mine, but there are also like some fun little stories. That's the other good thing about the Anne books. There are all these fun little stories that happen along the way. And a lot of the romances, again, I'm gonna talk about this more later, but Ellen Montgomery did just fine with romance if it was humorous. So while her greatest weakness was romantic development when it's serious, I think her greatest strength as an author, and something that's rare and underrated, especially among female authors, is her humor. She had a real talent for humor, and especially romantic humor, and like kind of ridiculous characters and their romances. Um, she was really, really good at that. So anytime her short stories were like serious, they're usually garbage. But if she was writing something funny, they're actually usually really good. So I think that's an important point. And then a lot of the side stories in the books are funny, and so they are really good. Um, but obviously, she didn't want to make like her main characters have only like kind of ridiculous and funny romances, so they aren't done very well. But all in all, the Anne books are good. They have a lot of flaws, especially the later ones. And yeah, if you want to get to Rilla I and you don't really like Anne or aren't interested in all the stuff that happens like their children and stuff, you can totally just skip um, Anne of Ingleside and Rainbow Valley. Then there's Emily, the Emily books. There's 3 of them. And Ellen Montgomery connected with Emily a lot more. The Emily books are a lot more autobiographical. She really put her heart into these, which is sad that they're so inferior to the Anne books. They are really not very good in a lot of ways. Emily herself is an okay character. She doesn't have nearly Anne's like spirit, or she's not super interesting. I think the really strong thing about the Emily books is Emily's relationship with her best friend, Ilsa. That's like those are the book's strong point, but it's far outweighed by all the weaknesses. I feel like if Ellen Montgomery, they could almost have been better books if she just hadn't tried a romance in that series. I think she just like couldn't resist that, and she wanted a happy ending for her character. It's not really a happy ending though. It's one of those ones where the years just played out through all their kind of disappointed love, and by the end of the book, there's just been so many wasted years that you're really just kind of done and over it, and you don't really care anymore what happens to the characters. She was very rough with them. And again, this character, Emily's love interest, Teddy, is likable as a child. It's another instance of the characters kind of growing up together. He's in it very little. Something she really, really, really struggled with that's so frustrating. He's mentioned a lot, but he almost never speaks. He maybe says 2 sentences, maybe only 1 in that first book. It talks about them going, like playing together all the time and doing stuff together. It'll talk in passing, like in the past tense of stuff that he talked about, stuff he said, but actually times when he says something in the present moment in quotations, almost never happens. And maybe it's a slight exaggeration to say that he only speaks once, but if you go through and check, it's shockingly little. And it doesn't improve much over the course of the 3 books. He says the most in the last one, but by then he's not as likable anymore. We don't really know who he is anymore. And again, there's not really any development. This romance is frustrating on both sides. While in the Anne and Gilbert romance, at least Gilbert was like straightforward, and Anne was like resisting. The problem was with her. She didn't realize she was in love with him, however that works. The Emily and Teddy romance is way more frustrating because it's never straightforward. He's too shy to ever say anything about it. She's too proud to ever say anything about it. They do both know that they love each other. They just won't do anything about it. And every little thing, every little circumstance that kind of sets them back, he'll get embarrassed about something, feel like maybe she doesn't want him to say anything or doesn't like him, and he'll just wait another year or another 5 years, basically. Super frustrating. He has no development. He never talks. Really, really frustrating. And again, any merit that the books would have in other aspects is really lost because of this big flaw. And another thing that's frustrating is that there's this this other romance that she has. I feel like most of her heroines go through, pretty much all of her heroines go through a phase of thinking they're in love with someone else, even getting engaged or being on the point of getting engaged to someone else. I think that happens to all of her main heroines in like her series books. And this one's really frustrating because the rival guy is developed far more than Teddy. And he's a really bad guy, Dean. And, reading the books when I was young, I wasn't as like creeped out by it as much as I would be reading them now. Because I don't know, growing up reading older stuff, you kind of have older ideas, and it was much more common back in the day for older men to marry younger women. But Dean is downright creepy. Like he's not supposed to be. I feel like Ellen Montgomery liked him as a character, but he's just an odd guy. He's weird. He's selfish. He's supposed to be like interesting, but he's not. He meets Emily as a child. He's an adult. I want to say he's not even a super young man. He's like, might even be like 30. He meets Emily when she's like 12, and he's like, yeah, I'm going to wait till she grows up and marry her. And he like works to be her friend and to get into her good graces so that this can happen someday. It's creepy and weird, and it's just unfortunate that you get more development of him than you do of Teddy. And yeah, just a weird character. He's kind of interesting, but yeah, not a good guy, not likable. He's just weird. But because he's not like a straightforward good guy, Ellen Montgomery had no problem writing about him and making him talk. But she couldn't do that with her main hero because she didn't know how. So that's really frustrating, and those kind of ruined the Emily books for me. So those are the Emily books. And then you have the Pat books, Pat of Silverbush. There's only 2 of them, and they are enjoyable. I really found them fun to read. Pat's home life and her love for her home is enjoyable. She takes it to an extreme. I feel like, again, Ellen Montgomery was really basing a lot of her own feelings, really putting those into Pat. And so, yeah, Pat has a lot more, I feel like, personal flaws, like personality flaws than the other heroines. Yeah, her extreme attachment to her home, like her physical home, above any friends or family considerations is it's odd, but it kind of works for me as the setting for a story, because that really is kind of the focus, how she can't stand change, she can't stand that her family home would be changed in any way. So that's kind of the setting of the book, and as the setting, I don't mind it too much. And then it ends up getting in the way of her romance, of course, because she doesn't want to leave her home. She's also kind of like Anne. She doesn't want to admit that she's in love with this guy who she's known since childhood. Again, common theme here, but Jingle, again, he's developed more as a child, and I feel like he's more likable than the other boys when they're like young. He's, because of his story, because of his plot and his background, he gets more time being developed as a kid than most of the others do. So as a child, he has a lot more like speaking lines, more development. You see them doing things together and actually talking together. So that's really good. As an adult, he has very little development, but he's not in it very much. But he's just kind of boring. That's the thing. She couldn't do an interesting romance. It was like she had this ideal of how romance needed to be, and she couldn't do it any other way, at least when she was taking it seriously. She couldn't do it any other way, but it's like, man, if that's what romance is like, who wants it? It's so boring. Because a guy might be interesting, but as soon as he's in love, he gets boring in an instant. And yeah, it was like she had this ideal. Um, this is the way it is, and if it's there's like no other way when it's true love. But again, it's like, well, who wants that? So yeah, I am grateful there are only 2 Pat books because otherwise, who knows how long this would have gone on. Um, but yeah, it's rough. All all are great characters. Just these guys that could be good aren't because they fell in love. It's like it should be the opposite. You compare her to like Charlotte Bronte, you look at Mr. Rochester and Paul Emanuel, and it's like um, such character development, and it doesn't even take that much time. Um, you just have to know what the character is like. I feel like Ellen Montgomery just didn't know her own character. She had this ideal of a man, and as soon as he turned romantic, she tried to paste it on whatever character she was doing. It just doesn't work. Um, and yeah, no chemistry between the characters and the minds of these love interests. They can have that as friends, but as soon as they're more than friends, it's just gone. It's super frustrating. I think it's also a very unfortunate portrayal of romance to any young girls reading this. Yeah. Read Jane Eyre. Read Villette. Not like most guys are like those guys either, of course, but a lot more interesting. But no men, unless they're just so boring, are like the heroes in Ellen Montgomery's books. That's for sure. That being said, again, it's not like there aren't any good male characters. Obviously, her books are full of good female characters and good supporting cast, male and female. So the Anne books are my favorite when it comes to like series. But as far as Ellen Montgomery's best work and best writing, that is her standalone novel and I believe her final novel, Jane of Lantern Hill. This book has the best development, and while it revisits a lot of her common themes, a lot of her kind of character tropes that she would use over and over, it does them kind of to the best of her ability. It was like all her past experiences culminating in this, and while she didn't really learn from her mistakes, at least she has grown as a writer. And Jane's father, Dad, as he's always called, is her best male character. He is really, really good. And he stays mostly good because he doesn't have the resurrection of romance until the very end of the book, and then as soon as that happens, and the little bit that you get of that, he's pretty sappy, but there's not much of it because it's not really romance at all. It's just about focuses on this girl, her relationship with her parents, and then her blossoming out as a young woman, and it's not messed up or confused by trying to give her any kind of romance. The romance that is in the book is between her estranged parents, and again, it doesn't really come till the end, and you don't have to see it very much because, again, it is as soon as that happens, it's kind of like this great character of her father is instantly gets a lot worse. But again, there's not much of it. I think it's her best work. The male characters are really good, really well developed, and this dynamic of father and daughter is something that you hadn't really seen in any of her books. Obviously, Emily and Anne are orphans. Emily had this extremely, extremely attached and kind of over the top relationship with her father before he died, but she was very young. That happens at the beginning of the book. Pat has very distant parents. I actually think, I didn't really mention that because I was talking about the romance problems, but Pat's relationship with her mother and father is also one of the big problems with the book. They're portrayed as being like really good, but there's no evidence of them being really good. You read it and it's like, oh, they're so great. And it's like, no, these are really bad parents. They're not involved in their children's lives at all. So we hadn't really seen that. Pat has a father, but he's grumpy and not around. And the other girls don't have fathers. And Anne's relationship, like with Matthew, comes to be like her father figure, is really, really good, but it's different. This very like companion-like father-daughter relationship is the book's strong point, and it is, like I said, it's fresh. It's kind of the only theme that she really explores in that book that she hadn't already explored a ton of times in like her other novels and short stories. I think that's probably what makes it good, but it's also well done. It's like fresh to her, and she actually did it really well. So yeah, I also appreciate that it's a standalone, which is something that she didn't normally do for her novel length books. So yeah, definitely her best work. Other than like maybe the first Anne book, but again, if you look at that as a whole, they really do go downhill a lot. So yeah, again, her weakness was this ideal of romance that wasn't realistic and that she couldn't fulfill anyway. Lack of development in her heroes, and then her greatest strength being her humor. Her short stories, the funny ones, are really hilarious. They're super fun to read aloud. And she has like this wit and this real talent for making like these funny caricatures of people. Yeah, I think is a really great strength and one that can be overlooked, but is really fun and makes her books enjoyable. It can make even her overall technically blah books interesting and enjoyable. All these little side stories and fun characters. So those are just some thoughts that I was having on Ella Montgomery. I am a fan of a lot of her work. And I don't know, sometimes if an author's been around long enough, their flaws can almost become endearing, This joke about Ella Montgomery's not being able to do romance is kind of fun, with other people who are very familiar with her work. You can kind of laugh about it together and just be like, yeah, that's the way it is, but we enjoy her books anyway. Because they are fun and her settings are fun. A lot of her characters are fun. So yeah, those are some thoughts on Ella Montgomery for anyone who's a fan. Hope you enjoyed and have a good day. I'll see you next time.